If you committed a crime 100,000 years ago, this is what happened to you. It's roughly 100,000 years ago. You're hungry. Everyone is hungry. And your neighbor has meat. So you take it. No cameras, no witnesses, no police to call. Just you, the meat, and whatever happens next. And something does happen next. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about ancient humans. They didn't just shrug and move on. They had rules. Deeply serious, socially enforced, life or death rules. And the consequences for breaking them were, in many cases, far worse than anything a modern courtroom could hand you. There were no prisons, no judges in robes, no appeals process. But there absolutely was justice. Just a completely different kind. One that was faster, more personal, and occasionally involved the entire group deciding whether you got to keep breathing. So what actually happened? Let's go back to the beginning. The crime problem that predates civilization by about 100,000 years. The social contract before anyone called it that. Here's something that sounds obvious, but is genuinely profound when you sit with it. Humans have always lived in groups, and groups by their very nature require rules. Not because someone sat down and invented ethics one afternoon, but because a group without rules isn't a group. It's just a collection of individuals eating each other's food and stealing each other's mates until it falls apart entirely. The earliest human bands were small, probably between 20 and 50 people. Some estimates go as high as 150, which is actually a number that shows up repeatedly in anthropology, called Dunbar's number, the theoretical cognitive limit on how many stable social relationships a human brain can maintain at once. In a group that small, everybody knows everybody. There is no anonymity. You cannot commit a crime and disappear into the crowd because there is no crowd. There's just the 12 people you live with, hunt with, sleep next to, and depend on entirely for your survival, which means the social consequences of bad behavior were immediate, visible, and inescapable in a way that modern humans have almost no frame of reference for. Imagine if every single person you relied on for food, shelter, protection, and companionship all knew exactly what you did and had real power to respond to it. That is the enforcement mechanism ancient humans had, not a legal system, a social system, and social systems, it turns out, can be brutally effective. So what were the actual crimes? Before we get into punishment, let's talk about what ancient humans actually considered criminal behavior. Because not everything maps neatly onto modern categories. Theft was real and serious, food theft especially. In an environment where calories were literally life and death, taking someone else's share wasn't just rude, it was potentially lethal to them. It also broke the fundamental trust that holding a group together required. Violence within the group was serious, violence outside the group against enemies, competing bands, rival hunters, that was often celebrated. But hitting, injuring, or killing a member of your own community was a profound violation, not just morally, but strategically. You needed these people. Weakening your own group made everyone less likely to survive. Sexual violations existed. The specifics varied enormously by culture and by time period, but conflicts over mates appear in virtually every early human society we have evidence for, and rules around sexual behavior seem to be close to universal, even if the content of those rules differed wildly. Freeloading was a crime. This one might surprise you. In modern societies, not pulling your weight has consequences, but rarely legal ones. In ancient hunter-gatherer bands, consistent failure to contribute, to hunt, to gather, to help with children or the sick or the elderly was treated with deep seriousness. You were eating the group's resources. You were a liability. And there were mechanisms for dealing with that. Lying and betrayal. Deception within the group, giving false information about food sources, lying about what you hunted, breaking agreements, betraying the group to outsiders. These were violations that could get people killed, and they were treated accordingly. The first response, gossip? Yes, gossip. Before anything else, before confrontation, before punishment, before exile, there was gossip. And this is not a trivial observation. Evolutionary anthropologists have argued seriously and convincingly that gossip is one of the most important social technologies humans ever developed. The primatologist Robin Dunbar, the same person behind Dunbar's number, has argued that language itself may have evolved partly as a form of social grooming, a way to share information about who is trustworthy, who cheated, who cooperated, who betrayed, without having to personally witness every event yourself. In a small band of 50 people, reputational information spreads fast. If you steal from someone, everyone knows by nightfall. And reputation in that context was not just social capital. It was survival capital. Your reputation determined whether people shared food with you during a shortage, whether they helped you when you were sick, whether they backed you up in a conflict, whether they let your children into their protection network. A bad reputation in a 50-person group was not like having bad reviews on a business profile. It was closer to being slowly cut off from every resource you needed to stay alive. Gossip in this context was a distributed enforcement mechanism, decentralized punishment administered through the collective withdrawal of social goodwill. And it was the first tool ancient humans reached for when someone misbehaved. The second response, direct confrontation and shaming. If gossip didn't correct the behavior, or if the offense was serious enough to skip directly to escalation, ancient human communities had a second tool, public confrontation. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, which offer our best living window into how pre-agricultural humans might have operated, document a consistent pattern. When someone violates community norms, the group confronts them, not necessarily violently, not immediately, but directly, collectively, and with significant social pressure attached. Shaming in a small group context is genuinely powerful in a way modern people underestimate. We live in cities of millions, with countless social circles, multiple identities in different contexts. Ancient humans had one social context, the group. Being shamed in front of the group, being publicly identified as a thief or a liar or a freeloader, with nowhere else to go and no alternative community to retreat into, was psychologically devastating, and it was intended to be. There's also evidence from both anthropology and evolutionary psychology that humans have deeply hardwired responses to shame and social rejection. Shame activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Exclusion from a group, even temporary and symbolic, triggers threat responses in the brain that evolved specifically because exclusion was genuinely dangerous. Ancient humans who felt social rejection as painful were more motivated to conform. The ones who didn't care probably didn't survive long enough to pass on many genes. The third response, restitution. Here's where ancient justice systems get genuinely sophisticated in a way that often surprises people, because the instinctive modern assumption is that primitive meant brutal, eye for an eye, immediate violence in response to every violation. But that's not what the evidence shows. In many documented hunter-gatherer societies, the first goal of justice wasn't punishment. It was repair, making the injured party whole, restoring the balance that the violation had disrupted. If you stole food, you returned food, often more than you took. If you damaged something, you replaced it. If you injured someone, there were structured expectations around compensation. This is restorative justice, and it predates every written legal code by tens of thousands of years. The logic is straightforward when you think about it. In a small group that needs to keep functioning together, punishment for its own sake is a luxury you can't really afford. Breaking the thief's hands might feel satisfying, but now you have one fewer effective hunter and a person nursing a grudge inside your camp. Restoring balance gets the group back to operational stability faster. And operational stability was literally life and death. The fourth response, ostracism. When gossip failed, when shaming failed, when restitution wasn't offered or wasn't enough, ancient communities had a weapon that was, in the context of their world, more devastating than almost anything else they could do. They kicked you out. Ostracism, exile, banishment. And in the landscape of 100,000 years ago, being expelled from your group wasn't a metaphor for hardship. It was, in many environments, a death sentence. Consider what you lost. You lost the collective hunting knowledge of the group. You lost help in processing large kills. You lost protection from predators. You lost help when you were sick or injured. You lost access to the group's accumulated knowledge of the local environment. Water sources, safe caves, seasonal migration patterns of prey animals. You lost all of it. A single human alone in the African savanna or the Siberian steppe was not equipped to thrive. We are a cooperative species at a biological level. Our evolutionary strategy was not individual strength, it was collective intelligence. Take away the collective, and the individual human is a soft, slow, barely armed primate in a landscape full of things that want to eat them. Some expelled individuals survived by integrating into other bands, some didn't. The threat of ostracism was so severe that it served as a powerful deterrent. And for repeated or serious offenders, it was the consequence. The fifth response, execution. And then there were cases where even exile wasn't considered sufficient, where the threat someone posed to the group was deemed too serious, too immediate, or too persistent to manage through social mechanisms. And in those cases, ancient humans did what felt necessary. They killed them. This sounds brutal by modern standards. It sounds like something to be horrified by. But sit with the logic for a moment, because ancient humans were not operating from a position of cruelty. They were operating from a position of survival. If a member of your group was consistently violent, was threatening women and children, was undermining the group's ability to hunt or cooperate, was dangerous enough that exile was likely to result in them joining a rival group and leading attacks against you. The calculation changes. In a world without prisons, without secure detention, without any mechanism to neutralize a threat, without either keeping them in the group or killing them, execution was sometimes the only option left. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm, who spent decades studying hunter-gatherer societies across multiple continents, documented what he called the reverse dominance hierarchy, the way that egalitarian hunter-gatherer groups actively prevented any individual from becoming too powerful, too dangerous, or too disruptive. And his research found that execution of persistent, dangerous individuals was documented across cultures, across continents, and across time periods. It wasn't an aberration, it was a mechanism. Critically, these executions were almost always collective decisions, not one person exacting personal revenge. The group deliberated, sometimes for a long time, and reached a consensus that this individual was beyond the community's capacity to rehabilitate or contain. Then they acted together, which also served to distribute the moral weight of the decision across the group, rather than concentrating it in any one person. What about murder within the group? Here's one of the most genuinely complicated questions in ancient justice. What happened when the crime was killing? When the violation was the most serious one imaginable? The answer varied. A lot. But patterns emerge. In many hunter-gatherer societies, the first mechanism for responding to a killing within the group was the blood feud. The family or close kin of the victim had both the right and the obligation to seek retribution against the killer or the killer's kin. This system sounds chaotic to modern ears, but it had its own internal logic. It created mutual deterrence. If you kill my brother, I will kill you or one of yours. The knowledge of that consequence was a disincentive. It made violence a transaction with guaranteed costs. The problem, of course, is that blood feuds escalate. Retribution leads to counter-retribution. In a small band, a feud cycle can destroy the entire group's coherence and eventually the group itself, which is why, layered on top of blood feud systems, most societies develop mechanisms for interrupting the cycle: compensation payments to the victim's family, formal reconciliation rituals, mediators, often elders, who could broker agreements that allowed the feud to end without total annihilation. The architecture of modern legal systems, the compensation, the formal proceedings, the third-party judgment, they didn't appear from nowhere. They evolved as solutions to exactly these problems that ancient humans were already navigating, without courtrooms, using social technology that was thousands of years in the making. The role of elders and informal authority. One more piece of the picture that often gets left out. Ancient hunter-gatherer societies were, by and large, remarkably egalitarian compared to what came after agriculture and civilization. There were no kings, no formal hierarchies in the way we think of them, but there were elders, respected individuals whose authority came not from formal position, but from accumulated knowledge, demonstrated competence, and social trust built over decades. And these individuals played crucial roles in the justice mechanisms of early human groups. They mediated disputes. They remembered precedent. What was done last time a similar situation arose. They advised on what response was proportional. They helped the group reach consensus in ways that felt legitimate to everyone involved. They were not judges in a legal sense, but they were playing a recognizably judicial function, using experience and social capital to shape how the group responded to violations of its norms. The formal legal institutions humans eventually built, courts, judges, juries, the principle of proportional punishment, the concept of precedent, all of these have roots in social practices that predate civilization by a very long time. We didn't invent justice when we invented writing. We formalized and institutionalized something that had already been running informally in every human group since before we left Africa. So what does this tell us? Here's the genuinely unsettling thing about ancient justice systems when you look at them closely. They were not random. They were not chaotic. They were not simply whoever is strongest wins. They were rational responses to a specific problem. How does a group of interdependent humans maintain cooperation and shared norms without formal institutions? And the answers they arrived at, reputational enforcement, shame, restitution, ostracism, collective decision-making about extreme cases, are remarkably consistent across cultures and time periods, which suggests they weren't invented arbitrarily. They emerged from something deeper, from the nature of what it means to be a social animal trying to live with other social animals in a world that does not forgive mistakes. We built prisons eventually. We built courts and codes and constitutions. But underneath all of that formal architecture, the same ancient mechanisms are still running. You're still tracked by your reputation. Social exclusion still registers as physical pain in your brain. The group still has enormous power over the individual. The specific tools changed. The underlying logic never did. And somewhere in your brain, right now, there is circuitry that evolved in exactly this environment. That is exquisitely sensitive to what the group thinks of you. That monitors social standing the way other animals monitor the horizon for predators. That experiences being caught violating a norm as a genuine threat to survival. Because for most of human history, it was. The next time you feel the sick drop of being caught doing something wrong, or the sharp anxiety of social disapproval, or the deep unease of being excluded from a group you wanted to belong to, that's not weakness. That's 100,000 years of survival technology running exactly as designed. You are the product of every ancestor who felt that and changed their behavior because of it, and who lived long enough because they changed